Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us for this week's panel conversation. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement with a company called Polco. We help communities build stronger engagement and help with performance-related issues. But it's all premised around the notion of how do you engage with your population to get what expectations are, what priorities are, just to get a better understanding of the needs of the overall community. And these panels are really designed to get the perspectives of leaders in the profession from around the country on what they're doing to be successful. And now as we're entering into this kind of post-COVID era, there's other challenges and opportunities that are confronting communities. And so I'm really excited for today's panel. Our hope is that you'll just take away a new idea, a new perspective, something that you'll be able to use in your operations or in your community. But to benefit from the perspective and professional talent of the people who are going to be talking with us today. Here's how the day is going to go. I'll do a quick introduction of the panelists, and then I'll queue up the topic. And there's 3 questions that we'll be asking each of the panelists. And then at the end of that time, we'll allow some opportunities for them to ask each other questions. Overall, the process generally takes about an hour, and if everybody's okay with that, I would love to just kind of kick it in. Let me make some introductions here. I'm really happy that these 3 leaders, oh my gosh, Sharon, oh, there we go, there you go. That's a problem of using a template from last week. Our first panel is Steve Rymer, who is the city manager in Tigard, Oregon. I've had the great pleasure of knowing Steve for 2 decades, dating back to when we worked together in Minnesota. Steve is one of the most talented professionals that I have ever been around. His focus has always been on the horizon, and his interest has always been focused on serving the community, serving the people that he works with, and building strong community engagement. And so Steve is one of those really unique talents in our professions, and really excited to have Steve here. Steve has excelled throughout his career. He's worked as a city manager in Morgan Hills, California, Rochester, Minnesota, and now in Oregon. So I'm really happy that Steve has found some time to share his perspectives. Steve, would you mind just kind of adding a little color to your background?
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Matt. Nice to see you again. Like you said, we worked together a couple decades ago. As Matt mentioned, I just really enjoy the role of working directly with our community in each of the communities I've been in. We've always prioritized communications, engagement, and equity as a key to what we do. So I look forward to talking about that today. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Really nice that you're here. Our second panelist is Marianna Marysheva, who's the interim city manager in Irvine, California. Marianna is a seasoned veteran with over 20 years of local government experience that has helped her become an innovative and creative leader with an established track record of getting things accomplished, building partnerships, promoting open and transparent government. Her expertise is in financial management, which is such a critical skill set to have these days. But she's also been recognized nationally for her skills in transforming organizations. And I'm just really excited to learn how Irvine has been addressing community engagement and particularly approaching this newest chapter in the recovery period following the pandemic. Marianna, thank you for being here, and I would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Matt. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning. As you mentioned, I've been fortunate to serve many communities in California over the last 25 years, as well as some communities nationwide through my consulting practice. Every community is unique, but at the same time, every community is similar to every other in terms of the issues that we face and how we deal with those challenges. So I look forward to the panel discussion today.
Yeah, thank you. You know, there are some universal truths around local government and the services that we provide, regardless of the size and the geography. And engagement is one of those universal things. And so it's really nice to have you part of this conversation today. And let me introduce our third panelist. Sharon Landers became the first female city manager of Carson, California in 2019. Sharon really has an interesting career track, including executive experience at various state and local agencies like the San Jose Redevelopment Authority, the Los Angeles County Transportation Authority, New Jersey Department of Transportation, and even as transportation advisor to former New York mayors Ed Koch and David Dinkins. Ironically, Sharon worked as an assistant city manager in Irvine, California as well, and interim CEO for the Orange County Great Park, which I think is a great project. It's a 13-acre park being developed on a former military site, now considered a Superfund site. Sharon, thank you for taking some time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspectives. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I think similar to the other guests that you have, we've all had experiences in a variety of cities. And I would emphasize that one of the things that I've really learned is that each one has their own character. And while I definitely agree with Marianna that there are common issues, common threads throughout all of them, particularly in this pandemic, I think that, fiscal issues is something that all of us have shared. And food insecurity, for example, is another one. But each community addresses their issues very differently because of their own character. And that's what I've loved in my career, learning about those different cities. Just to mention one other thing, my career started as a lawyer, and I moved into policy and then into management and ultimately into executive management. And so I'm certainly not a career path that many people will follow.
But it's a wonderfully full career path that you've had. So I really, really do appreciate you being part of the conversation. Well, thanks to all of you. Really looking forward to the discussion today. Let me kick it off. The topic of the day is the value of community engagement under the American Rescue Plan Act. As all of the communities are kind of coming out of the pandemic and just the overall challenges, there's a new opportunity in front of communities across the country, and that is how do you invest in your community and how do you involve the residents and the businesses and all of the community stakeholders in that conversation? We need to make sure that we understand what the current priorities are, because what was a priority pre-COVID may not be a priority today. And so the importance of really getting a good handle around what the current priorities and expectations are is such a critical thing. And it's got to be authentic connections. It's got to be a true opportunity or true efforts to try to understand where residents' heads are. We know that that residents, engagement has always been difficult. One of the biggest frustrations that I had as a city manager was going to meetings where there were more staff people there than residents. And so it's always been a challenge. And then the pandemic lays on top of that a couple of things. The immediate need to work virtually and the increased challenge of trying to figure out ways to make sure that people are feeling connected to the community and so that they feel like their voices are being heard. Now, our research has actually shown that trust in local government has gone up over the past year. And I think in part that's just simply because local leaders have stepped up and made sure that those connections have been focused on and maintained. And because you're virtual, it actually has become a little bit more convenient for people to get engaged. And so the challenge, and maybe one of the questions and things to explore today, is how do you go about maintaining and building upon kind of an emerging trend of increased levels of engagement that are coming out, and then using that information as you start to position your community for the American Rescue Plan. So those are the areas that I think are just really important to focus on. So there are three questions that we're going to be posing to all of you. How are you going to go about the process of identifying community needs and priorities that will help you know how to spend the American Rescue Plan resources? How does generally resident input guide you in the work in your communities on the delivery of public services? And then, what are the strategies and tools that you are finding successful for engaging and tracking your performance from a resident's perspective? And as you think about that one, if there's ways that you can also include conversations around those harder to reach populations in your communities, what are you using successfully that other local government leaders would really benefit from? And so with that, I'd love to just jump right into the question. And Steve, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk about how you are going about identifying your community needs and priorities that you're going to be using in the American Rescue Plan work?
Absolutely. Thanks for that question, Matt. We've been fortunate in Tigard that we have several documents like many communities, but we've also been in the process of updating our documents throughout this time. And I bring that up because as we looked at our strategic plan, that really is the foundation that drives all that we do. When I look at our Parks and Recreation Master Plan, we're going to be starting a community resiliency plan. These are all efforts that we're using to serve our entire community. And as a benefit, they're also helping us guide how we are looking at investing our rescue plan funds. And because we have time this time around, rather than just a few short months or a year to invest, we can be more strategic and we can really get to what the heart of these funds are for. And so as we look at the foundation, like in our strategic plan, as we updated that, the community said there's three things that are really important to them. That's health, access, and equity. And I would say all of us here today, as well as others around the country, would say those are probably three key things that we're trying to address in our rescue plan efforts. And so as we've started to create our investment categories, we've really grounded it in those areas. Also, as we've gone through the process of continuing to update the documents I referenced, like our parks master plan, that too has a very much a focus on our equity and where are the equity in our parks, or where are there underserved communities. And so looking at that, looking at our capital improvement programs, looking at areas that we said, if we just had the funds, we'd be doing this. And unfortunately, at times, those are areas that should probably receive the funds and haven't in the past. And so we're also looking at our planning documents to make sure that as we invest these funds, are we achieving the outcome that we're trying to get at? And our council is very intentional on this. They want to be very strategic. They want to make sure that our families and individuals and businesses continue to be supported. And at the same time, they want to make sure that we have a long-term effort, a long focus on making some key investments, be it in new initiatives or projects that really advance our community and meet those three outcomes that our community has been very active in and very focused on, which, as I said, was health, access, and equity.
So, Steve, is your community needs process kind of embedded in your strategic plan updates and your resiliency plan updates, and kind of the planning operations that are already in place, or is there a new initiative that you have started really focused in on ARPA?
It's a combination. A lot of it is embedded in the work that we've done. Those documents reflect the community's needs and wants, and they've been updated during the pandemic. And so it's very real-time information. At the same time, just like this morning, we sent a survey out to our community roundtable, which is made up of nonprofits, faith-based organizations, to help us further explore what are those real community needs that families have, that individuals have. We have great resources with our Downtown Alliance and our Chamber of Commerce to understand the needs of our business community. And so we're just trying to make sure that, once again, as we invest in them, we have some real-time data, but we also have that more global information that we've been gathering over the course of the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. It'll be fun to, I hope you're going to share a little bit more about the community roundtable in another question that's coming down the road. So thanks.
Absolutely.
Marianna, can you talk about how you are going about identifying community needs and priorities in Irvine as you start to prepare to use the ARPA funds?
Absolutely, Matt. Thank you. Similar to my colleague, Steve Reimer, there are so many different ways that we gather community input. And again, similar to Steve, the city of Irvine has established strategic priorities, and those priorities really guide us in the services that we provide to our constituents. But on top of that, especially in the last year, we really had to do a reassessment of community needs. And I think what was very clear to us is there are deficiencies in areas such as affordable housing. And it's something that's not new to California, it's something that's not new to Irvine, but I think especially during the COVID pandemic, the issues of affordable housing availability came to our attention very, very quickly. In addition, challenges with regards to some of the city's older facilities. And the reason it's a challenge is when it comes to protecting health and safety of our residents on a going forward basis, we need to make sure that we have not only adequate facilities, but facilities that provide proper air filtration, proper access, and so on. So some of those issues came to light. In addition, we're looking at issues such as broadband access and internet connectivity and ability of our residents and businesses, especially small businesses, to stay connected. And again, during the COVID pandemic, those issues came to light as well. So as we look at our priorities, we look at the issues that I just mentioned, they are going to be priorities for us as we structure our spending plan. Now, as everyone on this panel knows, we're still awaiting final guidance from the federal government. And some of the priorities that I mentioned may or may not be applicable to us. Because, for example, in the area of affordable housing, not only it is the unavailability or lack of availability of affordable housing per se, but it's also where we stand with regards to the overall income in the community. And so that may or may not qualify us. Now, more specific as to seeking input from our residents, there's so many different ways, and different communities handle this differently. In many other cities, we would conduct citizen surveys to get input. Here in Irvine, because the community is so large and diverse, we tend to get information either directly through council members or council meetings. And our council meetings always involve great participation by our community, especially now virtually. But we also conduct issue-specific town hall meetings, which lately have been virtual. So we had town hall meetings, for example, on housing production and affordable housing in general. We're going to have a discussion on broadband and internet connectivity. So all of that information is going to come together to help us formulate our spending plan. Thank you.
Are you still meeting virtually?
We have a lot of our town hall meetings virtual, but as of June 15th, the great reopening date for the state of California, all of our council and commission meetings will be open to the public, but the virtual component for now will stay.
You're working your way back to a normalcy kind of routine. That's great. And Marianna, did you notice whether or not this may be addressed in a later question, but did you notice whether or not your engagement levels increased during this past year?
I would say they have, both looking at our council meetings as well as town hall meetings, because we made it so easy for the community to participate virtually. You can participate from the comfort of your home. There has been great participation in various meetings, whether it's a council meeting, a commission meeting, or a town hall meeting. We had a number of community meetings on the budget as we rolled out our budget. So I would say that the participation definitely has gone up.
Yeah, well, best of luck with the transition back to seeing people in person. Sharon, can you talk about how Carson is dealing with identifying community needs and assessing priorities as you get ready for the ARPA funds?
Yes, I think that it's as everybody has just talked about, you don't really want to start that process just in front of getting these monies. You really need to know where you are way ahead of time. And so I think just like what you heard from Steve and Marianna, there are certain tools that we use in general as planning tools. And so for us, I finally, about a year into my new job as city manager, was able to pull together a workshop for the council on mission, vision, and priorities. It was something that I really wanted to do the day I got here, but it took us a year to get that organized. And that really is similar, I think, to what I thought I heard Marianna talk about, where Steve identified, I think it was Steve, our key areas that we want to focus on. Doing it off the top of my head, I was trying to see if I could find my document, but public safety is always at the top of everybody's list. But for us, it was also economic development, infrastructure, maintenance, and then finally, providing excellent programs and programming for the community. Those are the top ones, but we're using those now in our budget process. And we just got through our budget process. All of us are at the end because we're pretty much all at fiscal years that end at the end of June. I do want to throw in one plug for my community. I'm so proud of this. We just passed our budget on Tuesday, and we passed the first structurally balanced budget in over a decade.
Wow.
So it's a huge, I know, my city manager buddies know what that means. We've always had a balanced budget in California. You're required to. This city has always benefited from a huge amount of one-time funds. So we've always been able to close our budget that way. But this year, because in the middle of the pandemic, we got an increase in our sales tax. One of the things that our voters gave us, and also because we were looking ahead, we put in place a pension obligation bond just before the pandemic, which also enables us to monitor and manage our financial needs. So our city is in a better place financially than many, many other cities. And because we are not a large destination city, like some of our neighboring beach cities, we didn't lose a ton of sales tax from people no longer coming to be in your community. But I have found during the pandemic, similar to Marianna, that when we've done workshops, even in a pandemic, we will get huge attendance if it's an issue of interest. And what's been required is how to set up the process of input in a safe way. That's really been the struggle. We know that we're going to get large input. How do we make sure we do it in a way that's safe? So we've used our stadium. We're blessed to have a sports stadium here, and they've provided us huge open space, and they were able to do all the broadcasting so people could watch our meeting from home. And we were able to safely distance people so that they could participate. In other situations more recently where we knew that there was going to be a crowd, but not as big, we've opened up our community center and we've done the broadcasting from there in conjunction with our Zoom meeting with our council. So we found different ways, and I'm sure everybody has, on how to make sure that even though we're not completely open and we're still meeting by Zoom, we've been able to provide robust public input.
Well, first of all, Sharon, congratulations on your budget. That's no easy task. So really great kudos to you and your team on putting that together.
Thank you.
Are you planning on, as you kind of work back into the real world and meeting in person, are you going to continue doing hybrid type of meetings?
I suspect we will for a while. My council is just discussing that now and looking to see what other cities around us are doing. And it seems like everybody's in some kind of hybrid fashion right now. But, you know, I know Irvine and Marianna mentioned something about broadband and internet connectivity and how this is something that, of course, during this pandemic, we all realized we're not, well, most of us, many of us, not where we want to be. And so one of the great things in the LA County area that I'm in is we have a very active COG that has been working on broadbanding for our region. But I will tell you a very small story, not to take too much time. One of the things that we decided that we wanted to do was when the schools were providing remote learning, and we have a working class community, we knew that for a lot of kids that meant maybe they're old enough, so I'm not saying there's anything inappropriate, but having to be at home alone while their parents were working. And so we wanted to provide those kids a safe environment to do the remote learning, but we didn't have Wi-Fi connected to our parks. So we scrambled. And in the middle of COVID, as an emergency project, we got our parks connected so that we can get our families to send their kids here so that they could do their remote learning at our community facilities.
You know what? Thanks for sharing that story. That is probably a very relevant issue for so many communities around the country. And so I'm really glad you brought that up. It just kind of highlights that you're adapting to the reality of not having the technology that you need in a remote kind of an environment. So yeah, that's a very, very helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Let's move on to the second question. Marianna, I'd like to start with you with this question. Can you talk about how community input influences how resident and business needs are met in your community?
Oh, absolutely. It's a number one factor in how we make decisions. And as I alluded to previously, there's so many ways for residents to provide input. First of all, I think many of our residents are very comfortable reaching out directly to either their council members or staff here in the city hall. We receive phone calls, emails, used to receive walk-ins, and probably will resume those soon, where residents come to us directly with their priorities, with their questions, with their issues. I'll give you one example. A couple of weeks ago, a resident reached out. They have a disabled child that they wanted to provide swimming opportunities to, and it wasn't clear if the city offered any. while we established very quickly a program, knowing that there is a demand beyond this one family. So based on individual feedback, a lot of times our programs and priorities and decisions are impacted. And of course, as I mentioned before, there are many other opportunities, council meetings, commission meetings. We have very active commissions from finance to community services to transportation to planning that receive input from residents at meetings, before meetings, and in between meetings as well. And I also mentioned town hall meetings on specific issues. We have town hall meetings, especially now virtually, on many issues on a frequent basis. Everything from transportation projects that we're rolling out to walkable community projects to environment, to waste pickup, to broadband, as I said earlier. So there's so many different ways for the residents to reach out to us. And based on that feedback, we tailor our services, our programs, which was really helpful for us in the budget as well. Similar to Sharon, our city council a couple of weeks ago approved the structurally balanced 2-year budget, and not only 2-year budget, but also 5-year financial plan. And especially today, post-pandemic, having a structurally balanced budget was a challenge. And our budget was based not only on the priorities that I described before, but also very active public participation and the community meetings, virtual community meetings that we held. So all of that input influences our decisions, including our decisions in the budget. One other piece that I will mention, and this will probably come up later on, is our city is very diverse ethnically and very diverse when it comes to languages. We have dozens of languages spoken in our community. So for us, multilingual outreach, and not only multilingual outreach, but outreach to hard to reach communities has been critical. Because a lot of times these communities, especially first generation immigrant communities, are hesitant to reach out directly to the city hall, hesitant to send an email directly or walk into a meeting. They're more comfortable with community-based organizations. They're more comfortable with their churches. They're more comfortable with their ethnic organizations that they may be connected with. So we have leaned heavily on our community partners to reach those communities. And for example, in offering vaccinations at one of our sites, we had over 400 people recently that came to the Chinese Cultural Center because that's the place where they feel there's a safe environment, there's an environment of trust. So that's one of the examples of how community outreach really works at that grassroots level.
That's.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I got a little glitch, so I apologize for interrupting. Thanks so much for bringing up how you are incorporating the input from those harder to reach communities. Does your strategic plan or does your council have policies in place that specifically states the priority around engagement, especially for attracting your diverse populations?
Not in our strategic plan. However, we recently rolled out a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. We have a committee of residents that was appointed to look at really our outreach efforts and how those outreach efforts impact our recruitment, impact hiring, impact promotion, but also engagement of residents in general and engagement of businesses. And I would love to talk more about this maybe in a different meeting, but we look at the makeup of our community in terms of ethnic backgrounds as well as languages, and we compare that to the ethnic backgrounds and languages of city employees as well as vendors that we do business with. And there's a big disconnect. We have a lot of work that needs to be done. And one of the challenges for us has been to reach out to those hard to reach communities, not only in their language, And we really have enhanced our efforts to reach out in multiple languages, but also reach out to them, as I mentioned, through organizations that they trust, as opposed to us sending direct emails or posting things on social media. We are now going through our community partners and we're asking them to spread the message, and that seems to be working.
Yeah, that's very important to point out. So thank you for sharing that. Sharon, can you talk about how community input influences how resident and business needs are met in Carson?
Oh my God. Everything that we do is based on the input that we get from our residents. And it's in the same various ways that have been already talked about. We also have very great communication from residents to our community council members. And actually, one of the things that we just recently put in place that will enhance that, although we went into a drag crying and screaming, is moving into districts. I understand, Marianna, that you're at the beginning of that right now also. But I think that what that will do is even make a particular council member more accessible to a smaller group of people, which makes it easier for them to understand the needs of that particular location. So we're just in the middle of that transition. But our community does not have pockets that don't speak up. I'm very familiar again with Irvine, and there's a large ethnic community there that in general does not communicate. And the kinds of things that Marianna talked about are really important to make sure that you tap into that part of the community. Whereas in my community, which is also very diverse in very different ways and culturally very different ways, we don't really have the same issue of people not communicating. However, what we do have is sometimes a language problem. And one of the things that we did last night that was amazing, and we've had interpreters at meetings when we've had workshops, but for the first time through Zoom, there is actually a function on there that's for an interpreter, where you bring an interpreter in and they are interpreting for you. You don't even realize that they're interpreting, because as the person speaking, they're interpreting for you. And when we're speaking, they're interpreting for the person in the other language. And it was a function that we're able to utilize on Zoom. So one of the things that I think we're learning is that Zoom, and I think it was mentioned before, has become an incredible tool that provides for even more opportunity for comment, because people don't have to leave their home. They can use their telephones, they could use their iPhones or their tablets, as long as they can figure out how to tap in. Plus, they can watch us on broadcast TV and comment. So it actually is providing a tool. Zoom has provided a tool that I suspect will be sticking around for a while. But we have been able to, through these workshops, through our council, through direct communication, to me, get a lot of communication. And I have found, I've gotten a lot of pleasure out of when people communicate with me directly. I don't want to say it too loudly, but I prefer it. But I really love when I get those communications instead of a note from my council member. I don't know if the public member thinks that they're not going to get a response if it goes to me, but I respond very quickly. It could be in the middle of the night. And then I follow up and make sure that they're taken care of. And I think that most of us have found this. You wind up turning that person into a friend, and where they realize that somebody is in City Hall to really address the comment and the concern that they brought about. And I've also tapped into my religious community. If I could say just for another second, because we've done some things with our religious leaders as well, our spiritual leaders. Following the George Floyd issue, we pulled together a group and we were working with them. One day I got an email from somebody saying, I live two doors down from a church and there's something wrong. They have a ventilator, a fan on their roof, and it's making so much noise that my kids can't sleep. I've tried to contact them and I can't reach them. So what did I do? I called one of the spiritual leaders through this group, and he identified the fact that the religious leader in that church had passed away, and they probably were running in some interim basis. And so it was very hard for the community to get in touch, but he was able to find a person, and within the community, they were able to find a person that could actually fix the fan. And so within a week, we had that problem solved because of the network that you build up, when you have those kinds of relationships in your community.
That is a great story. It's those little touches, isn't it? And it is all about building those relationships in whatever way you do it. And I agree with you that the personal connections are always the best. But you adapt to however you can make those connections. And so it sounds like you're really going beyond for making sure that that happens in your community. So thank you.
It's fun.
Steve, can you talk about how community input influences the things that you're doing for your residents and businesses in Tigard?
Absolutely. First, as my colleagues were talking, I was just thinking about how great it is that like we're really talking about this. It's not when parts of our careers we're checking the box to have input. We didn't really talk about engagement. It's like, right, we just want to communicate and get some input and then we move on. And so starting this, it's really moving from just asking questions, pushing out information to truly engaging. And I think that's what's been so successful for all of us on this meeting as well as others, that we have now moved to that spot where we know that we have to rely on our community. We work for our community, and our community has many great ideas, many questions, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we understand those and then utilize those in our policy recommendations, budgeting, service delivery, the new initiatives. And so culturally, our city council has really established the expectation here in Tigard, like other places, that we are not just going to push out information. We're going to listen to our community. We're going to ask questions, and then we're going to utilize that information. And a few things just to understand the culture is our mayor and our councilors expect us to respond to everything that we receive within a 24 to 48 hour period. And so we're doing that. We have many teammates that work on that. We track constituent. We have a thing called a constituent tracker where there's probably over 1,000 touch points at least a week that are documented in that. And that's important because teammates from throughout the organization are helping us track that. And what we do is we learn what are some of the common topics, what are some of the common themes that we're hearing from our community. There's also individual follow-ups that we have for neighborhood issues. It could be whatever the case may be. But we also are then taking that from a broader standpoint and saying, what is the information that our community needs? What are the conversations we have to have? So as we utilize those pieces of information, it really allows us then to take that into our conversations with ourselves as a team, as well as with our council members, as well as with our community partners and those that live in our community and work in our community. And so that has been invaluable. Many things Sharon mentioned, being able to go through a goal setting process. We too had our goal setting advance. And really it starts with bringing forward information like that, and the information that the council is receiving directly, that we're receiving, and then the formal communications that we have and information that we're documenting and utilizing. And as a result of that, during the advance, we came out of it with 4 very focused goals, which I thought was great, rather than having 9, 10, or 12, right? We were very focused, and it was really a result of the things that we hear from our community, like we need to continue to improve our park and rec system. So I mentioned us going through the adoption of a new master plan. And it wasn't just enough to say we're going to adopt the master plan, but the goal is, upon adoption, bring us a very realistic implementation and financing plan to make this a reality. And so rather than putting the document up on the shelf again and not serving our community, we're taking that to really find ways to serve our entire community. The other thing that was great is, as we were talking about this, like many organizations, we start talking about equity and the economy and our environment, and like places around the country as well. Rather than making those as goals, we're now at a point where those are part of how we are supposed to operate. Those are part of who we are, and no longer is it a goal to be equitable or to make sure that we're stewards of public funds or an environment. And during that conversation with the council, we ended up coming up with what's called a community promise, and we call it the 5 E's. And so we have the economy, we have equity, we have the environment, and then the council astutely said, well, engagement is one of those, and so is excellence. And so that is now one more piece of information that we have to help drive how we operate. And it's all founded in your question of, we need to understand what our community wants, needs, and their ideas are, and then find ways to advance that either directly from what we're doing or working with our community partners to assist them in meeting the needs of our community.
Steve, that is great. What is it's community, called the community what?
Community promise.
Community promise.
So it's really the 5 E's. And so they're overarching kind of foundational focuses for us in everything that we do.
I love to hear that, how you have taken this engagement piece as one element of that, but you have gotten that input, and that input then has led into strategic plans, which then goes into your customer tracking mechanism. Do you report that out to the public?
Yeah, it's reported out. It's reported out internally as well, and so we can see where we have that. And then, kind of a follow up on some of the other things. The one thing I didn't mention that I wanted to talk about was alignment, and we've been once again very intentional on being aligned. That's alignment in our documents, alignments in our departments. We're not perfect, but we have very much a focus on using that word to make sure everything that we're doing goes up to the ultimate goals. And so probably the latest example is our update of our library strategic plan, where we had over 1,000 residents provide input through a survey as one way. We've had other ways, but the great thing is it all aligns back to those three things I talked about: health, access, and equity. And so that only comes through, having those conversations internally as well as with your community.
That's excellent. Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing that. A lot of people will benefit from hearing that example. So thanks. Let's shift on to the final question in the remaining 15 minutes. And Sharon, I'd like to start with you. Can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're finding successful for engaging your residents and tracking your performance?
Yes, and I think this is probably very similar to something Steve just mentioned, although he called it something different. We have a tool that we rolled out. It's through a company called iWork, so it's probably the name isn't going to mean anything, but it's what other cities do. I'm pretty sure Irvine does it, where a community can, when they spot an issue, they can write directly in through their smartphone if it's a light out or a fire hydrant that's spewing water, or even a leak in one of our water systems where we're spilling water out onto the street. They could write in directly, and that all is tracked and followed. And that's one way that we're now encouraging people to get information to us about issues. Then what we're doing, and I think that this is something Steve may have talked about more proactively, is we're starting a parks master plan. We have one, but it's quite old, and also an asset management plan. And those are things that will enable us to really review what the status is and identify priorities with community input. We also have a pavement management plan, which I think everybody has in order to get federal dollars. But the idea is similar to that, which is for the public, it's finding an objective way of evaluating the quality of a particular thing, so that when you're trying to identify how to fund, you can use the quality information as a way of helping you direct your funds. And it provides a little bit more equality and equity in the community because it's done based on need. So those are the kinds of tools that we're starting to develop now, more than we had before. I'm finding we're a city of almost 100,000. So we're not that large a city. We're maybe mid-sized. And we're only about 68 years old. Maybe a little bit more than that, let's see. Well, somewhere around 55 years old. And as a relatively new city, we're still learning. So many things are done when you're smaller that are done in a very community-oriented way without all these tools. And they're great until you start getting a little bit bigger. And then you start finding that you have to do these a little bit more consistency with more thought. And so that's why we're starting to do it in the way that we're talking about. And particularly as we move toward districts, we think this is going to be very helpful in helping the council in a very fair way allocate resources, because we don't want to get into a situation where we have 4 districts and you have 4 mayors. We really want to have 1 mayor, 4 district council members, and a good way of allocating money for things that are needed across the city.
Yeah, no, that's very well stated. Do you have in your strategic plan process that you're going through, do you have metrics that are installed in that plan for helping you track your performance?
So we're gonna start doing that. We don't do that yet, but we will be actually as part of this budget process, which aligns, to use that word, aligns the activities that we'll be moving on with the priorities that the council identified in the mission, vision, and priority workshop, we're going to start now putting metrics in place. We will start doing that. But I do want to mention that in a lot of ways, a capital improvement plan is a great measure because you know what you've allocated for a year, and then you're able to see what you've completed. So at least on the capital side, that's already in place.
Yep. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. You've got a lot of stuff going on in Carson.
We do.
The district transition process, I'm sure, is very interesting. Steve, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're finding successful as you start to get resident engagement and track your performance?
Yeah, absolutely. I've touched on a few of them so far. One being a few different examples. Our strategic communication manager will convene the community roundtable on a quarterly basis and bring in leaders in the nonprofits and our faith-based organizations, as our colleagues have talked about as well. And we don't have a set agenda of asking them about city questions. We are there to listen and to see what they want to talk about. And I think that's an important part because as we're listening, we're learning things. And we then take that and ask them, so how can we help support you? And so it's really something that needs to continue, and we need to continue to develop that. But it's one way of really starting to reach into the community. Our mayor does a great thing every month, our Facebook Live, where there's no question off limits. And so if we're able to answer it on the spot, we will. If not, we follow up immediately and try to get some or get the answers back to them. We have your Tigard, many different things like that all of you probably have as well as this 24-hour way to communicate with us. And then we follow up. I talked about the importance and the priority and the expectation that we're always following up. And I think that's one of the key things in what we do. One thing I haven't talked about a lot, though, is our team itself. And we talk about engaging the community. And it's also about engaging ourselves, right? Because we have a lot of knowledge in our teams. And so as we're working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, those are very broad words, but a lot of it comes back to really being aligned internally, having teamwork, having a way to share information because we're all learning things differently and hearing things differently. And then it's making sure that we have that organizational culture that really expects and sets us up for success, because otherwise we're having those, maybe no communication, or we're having duplicate conversations with others and people wondering, well, doesn't the city talk to each other? We all hear that at times. And so that's an important part of this as well. As we gather information, it's also getting our team to be ones that are a resource for us. And so we're taking all of those and utilizing those different tools and other strategies, to really advance our organization and community. Another example I'll use, kind of closing of this one, after the horrific events of George Floyd, the way his life ended, all communities across this country and the world really took notice, right? And we stood up and said, we have to address this. This is not how the world should be. And so, like other communities, we quickly had a leadership by our council and mayor and created a public safety advisory board. But to fill those 16 seats, we went through a very inclusive process and transparent process with our community. And so we had 39 applicants. And so we had videos of each of those individuals as well as resumes. And we put those out to the public, and we asked the public to provide their input on each of the candidates and who do you think should serve on this board. The council then obviously took that information and utilized it in their deliberation on who to put on the board. We've had a few changes since it was put into place, and we still go back to that same information and utilize what we learned during that process to put the new individuals on the board. So like everyone else, it's a variety of different ways of doing it. And it's finding ways to do it in person. It's finding ways to do it through the technology that we have, through formal meetings like the council, and then just the one-on-one conversations at farmers markets. So,
Steve, thanks for sharing all of that. For as long as I've known you, one of the things that I've always been most impressed about is your ability to pay attention to your internal team. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that's a really important message, that alignment internally, so that you're all kind of working on the same path in a very intentional way, is just such an important thing. And your process for selecting your public safety advisory committee just absolutely validates your comments about commitment to engagement, taking it from listening to full engagement. That's a really creative way to do it. And so congratulations for go on to that next step in involving your community on that. Great stuff. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Welcome.
Marianna, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you are finding successful in Irvine as you kind of think about engaging residents and tracking your performance?
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. We have just a few minutes left, so I'll try to be very, very brief. I alluded to many of these strategies before. We have, as Sharon pointed out, a very active city council here in Irvine, where our mayor and individual council members are out in the community every single day, nonstop, engaging community members and bringing that input back to us. So there's a lot of informal communication happening face-to-face, virtually, via emails, as well as some of the other forums that I mentioned before, such as council meetings, commission meetings, issue-specific town hall meetings. But in addition to that, similar to Steve's case, we have asked and requested of our employees to serve as the eyes and the ears in the community, because the challenge is a lot of times it's the same community groups that engage with us. And perhaps it's 5% of our population, perhaps it's 10, but a lot of times we're not reaching to all of our community members. So to the extent that there are issues in the community, whether it's a maintenance issue, or traffic issue, or service issue, we need for our employees to help us out. So we have consistently told our employees, see something, say something. If you see something internal in the organization, you see something outside, whether it's a broken sidewalk or issues with our paving or lawns that need attention or service issues in our parks, let us know so that we can fix them. That's an additional layer of feedback. Connected to that, we have an app that both our residents and employees can use. Very, very easy to use. It's called Access Irvine, and it allows residents, employees, and others to submit a request in various categories. It could be a service request, it could be a maintenance request, it could be a picture that they send us of something that they see wrong in the community. So all of those feedback mechanisms help us. And of course, as I mentioned before, reaching out to hard to reach communities, especially communities that either do not speak English or do not feel comfortable connecting with us. And this is where through our nonprofits, through our community-based organizations, we reach out to them and we don't rely on our typical channels of communication. As an example, I mentioned our successful vaccination clinic at the Chinese Cultural Center. Well, the same Chinese Cultural Center that has a huge following recently reached out to us, and we're going to have a series of lectures for newcomers to Irvine. And they may be coming from another country or they may be coming from another city. And we're going to educate them on how to do business with the city, how to reach out to us on code enforcement issues, on public safety issues, on community services issues, and so on. And those lectures are going to be bilingual so that residents who do not speak English could get the information and then use it. So that's all on the engagement side. As far as the reporting side, we do have performance measures in place that were approved in conjunction with the budget. And we do quarterly financial reporting here in the city. And as part of that quarterly reporting, we will be reporting back on the city's progress and successes through those measures.
That was a great response. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for bringing up again, just how you go about using your community partners for reaching those hard to reach populations. Really, through our research, we also kind of endorse the notion that people will become engaged if they're engaging through a trusted partner or a trusted person. And so the way that you're approaching it in Irvine is directly aligned with the way that we approach our work. And so thanks for bringing that up. This has been a great conversation. I really, really have benefited from all of your ideas and your perspectives. Just this would be a time, if there's any questions or other issues that you want to bring up, this would be the best time to bring it up. It's a good opportunity for you to learn from each other if there's anything that you have on top of your mind.
I just want to comment that I appreciate the opportunity to have the exchange. And it's done two things. One is it's given me some additional ideas on the one hand, but on the other, it's validated some of the things that we're doing and that others are finding useful. And that's always nice to see. When we're such a diverse group of cities between this group, and I don't know, Matt, if that was part of your intention when you pulled this together, but this just goes back to the earlier comment that so much, in terms of how a city functions, not the character, but how it functions, so many things that are overlapping. Successful tools often are successful in one city, they're successful in another.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon, for that. I don't intentionally align communities in these conversations, but it's always great to get these varied perspectives on things that we all do in common, right? And you brought up earlier, the way that you solve a problem or the way that you approach an issue is really based upon your history and your culture and your organizational structure, and that's really one of the great things that comes out of these conversations. So thank you for sharing. I'm going to look at my notes here a sec. Here are some of the points that I brought up, or that I captured. This was just a wonderful conversation. All of you are focused on strategic planning and paying attention to kind of current and emerging priorities that are existing that may not have existed prior to COVID, and either kind of adapting current plans or building new plans. I think that was really great. I loved that you were all bringing up the notion of being intentional. Steve, the point that you brought up about listening to engagement, I think is a really valid comment. You've got to be authentic when you're engaging with your residents. And Marianna's searching for those ways to get to the deepest pockets of your community, so you're hearing all voices. Just really, really powerful stuff. Sharon, your point about the little touches and the little things and paying attention to fixing vents on churches. Those are the things that help people build trust and build that connection to their communities. Steve, the conversation that you had about incorporating engagement and taking it through your processes and making it part of your plans and part of your practices is just really, really sound. You all are doing great work on this engagement thing, and just super to be hearing and getting your perspectives. Let me just kind of wrap this up real quickly. Thanks for participating today. I'm going to follow up with all of you. I'll make sure that you get connections and the information from each other so that you can connect with each other if you like. You'll start seeing these recorded segments probably within a week on LinkedIn, and we just would ask you to share them with your network. People trust your opinions. People look to you for guidance and ideas, and that's one of the real values of these kind of conversations. And then I'll connect with you probably within the next week to just kind of get your feedback. I do these every week. I would welcome you to invite anybody that you think would be good at this to participate, and certainly looking for ways that I can do a better job in the work that I do with this. And so thanks for any thoughts or suggestions that you can make for me. And the best part for me is that I get to connect with 3 leaders from around the country every week, and today was no exception. Really, really wonderful to meet all of you. You're all doing just such great work and great leaders for your communities. And so thank you so much for spending some time with me and with this audience today. And I'm just going to look forward to connecting with you going forward, and maybe see you in Portland this fall.
I hope so.
That'd be
Thank
great.
you so much.
Thanks,
Thanks for
Matt.
having us, Matt.
Nice seeing all of you.
It's nice
Thank you so
talking with
much.
all of you.